I met with a group of young women who were interested in feminism to some degree. I have to say to some degree because young women aren't necessarily interested in that subject. And we had a great discussion. And Kesha stood out in my mind because when I said, how many of you would think of running for office? She said she might. And I didn't realize you'd do it that soon. But she actually represents the University of Vermont and the neighborhood. And she's turned into an outstanding legislator, did a great campaign, and is the youngest person in the legislature today. So it's great to have two different generations share this platform with you this afternoon. And I'm very, Kesha gives me hope that it's young women like her who will jump over the wall that divides you from being a private person to a public person and have a real greater impact on public policy at the local, state, and national level. What I thought we might start out discussing, since it's on everybody's mind to some degree, is Judge Sonia Sotomayor. And women, my belief is, and there's some evidence to back it up, that while women obviously aren't different in every respect from men when they hold public office or when they're appointed to office or when they serve on courts, there is some evidence that there is some difference. And you might ask why. How can you reach that conclusion when you obviously have conservative and liberal women and they run the same gamut as men do? Well, as I look at my own odyssey, I would say we simply bring somewhat different life experiences into the decision-making process. When I was governor, I governed like the governors before me, probably 95% of the time. I had to deal with all the issues they had to deal with. But that 5% was somewhat different in the sense that I had the first-hand experience of having 4 children, knowing I couldn't leave the house unless I got a qualified babysitter. I went to a hearing of low-income women who were threatened with the loss of child care. And I realized for them, it was a question of survival, whether they got affordable child care. They couldn't go to work without child care. If they couldn't go to work, they couldn't put food on the table. So one of our big initiatives was to quadruple the money for child care. Not because it's a female issue, because it's a family issue, and because it's an economic issue. But so women bring some differences. It's interesting that when I talk to the state court Women Justices Association, there is a National Association of Women Judges, they said sometimes just one woman on the court makes a big difference. And we've seen one woman on the court for a short time, 2 women on the court. Just read you when Justice Sandra Day O'Connor left the court, a reporter, it was Jane Crawford Greenberg, who some of you may have seen on TV, noted that, and I quote, "She looked for the practical effect of the law, discussing a case which involved whether a police officer could order passengers out of a car during a search. She said, 'You mean to detain a pregnant woman with a baby in the rain?' Getting again to the point of how the law would be applied. How would it affect people? How would it affect women? How would it affect children?" Obviously things that she was very sensitive to. And we see in Justice Ginsburg now a similar interesting, I don't want to take up too much time because I want to hand the microphone over to Kesha, but I'll just dwell on this one case, which became quite well known, and that is the Lily Ledbetter case. I don't know how many of you followed it, but Lily Ledbetter was a supervisor on the factory floor, a non-traditional job for a woman at Goodyear Tire and Company, rubber company, for 20 years. And after 20 years, she got an anonymous letter saying, Lily, you've been paid significantly less than the men who held the same job for 20 years. So she sued. She won in a lower court. Goodyear appealed to a higher court, and she lost the case on a 5-4 decision. And the reason the court gave was she hadn't filed her case within 180 days of experiencing discrimination. Well, Justice Ginsburg read the minority opinion from the bench, and she read it with a passion. And she basically said, this is not how discrimination works. First of all, you usually don't even know what the person next to you is earning. Secondly, small discrepancies you wouldn't feel were enough to go to court, but after 20 years, it's obviously significant. Well, why would Ginsburg feel so strongly? Well, as you may know, both Ginsburg and O'Connor graduated at the top or near the top of their law school classes. Neither of them could get a job in a law firm after they graduated. So they knew what discrimination was, and that is why they stood up for it. Fortunately, enough members of Congress actually reversed that decision by passing a law, and it was the first bill that Barack Obama signed to reverse the Ledbetter case. As a Judge Sotomayor, I find a couple of things interesting. One is, overall, the reaction has been positive. I think we have to recognize that. Overall, I think there's a recognition that she has stellar credentials, that she has more experience as a judge than anybody has had who was appointed to the Supreme Court in the last 100 years. But there's still the sniping from the sidelines is still kind of interesting. One is, and I guess Newt Gingrich took it back, but accused of reverse racism. Because she made a remark about a strong Latina woman may be better than a white man. Debatable whether she should have said that. I would have said different, but she said it. They combed through thousands of pages, obviously, to find that. What's beneath that is what I think is kind of fascinating and a bit disturbing. The assumption is that she would bring something new, ethnic politics, ethnic identity. Well, from my perspective, the predominantly white male court has also brought its ethnicity into the court of white men. But that is considered the norm. That is considered the template. And anything that deviates from that is considered an aberration. So I think we have to stop and think about that. Would a court made of 5 women and 4 men be different, rule differently? Incidentally, state Supreme Courts do better than the U.S. Supreme Court. I just checked the figures today, but 36% of states have a woman as the Chief Justice of their state. That's quite interesting. And overall, judges in state courts are 30%.